Well, thank you so much for joining everyone today. I think we might just start. So today we're going to talk a little bit about movement and how movement impacts behavior and development. If you haven't been to one of my talks just yet, my name is Kate. I'm the owner of Upside Down Therapy. We are a pediatric occupational therapy company based in Alderley in Brisbane. I'm one of the senior therapists there, but I'm also the owner and director. I'm originally from South Africa, and I completed my Bachelor of Occupational Therapy in the University of KwaZulu-Natal in 2011. And since then, I have worked within school settings, within hospital settings, and within private practice. And I've done heaps of developmental courses, specialising in sensory processing, early childhood development, but as well as things like feeding and toileting and understanding neurodiversity. I immigrated to Australia about 5.5 years ago, and I've been working within the early intervention services since then. I opened up Upside Down Therapy just over 3 years ago. Besides being an occupational therapist, I am also a co-trainer with SenseUp Training, where we conduct annual sensory in action workshops across Australia. So we're currently busy with them currently. We've just finished our Brisbane and Melbourne training, and next week or this coming weekend we'll be going through to Sydney. I'm also a co-owner of a Australian therapy company called Sensory U, where we are a family-run business selling and manufacturing sensory and therapy equipment. And aside from all things work-related, I'm also a mum, and I have 3 little children. And I'm just really passionate about providing early intervention services, collaborating, and education is one of my key areas of interest. So I just absolutely love this video because I sometimes think that we are often triggered by our kids' behaviors and their need for movement. And I wondered if you've ever seen a child that's, either at home or at a school where they're just really struggling to sit still or just constantly on the move or just struggling to have those sort of quiet times throughout the day. It's often tempting to view the behavior or the movement as being disruptive, but what it essentially is telling us is a vital clue about what their nervous system, their system needs are. So it's important to look at the behavior and not necessarily think that it's being disruptive or the child is doing it to be disruptive, but more about what it is that they are telling us that their nervous system is needing. So today we're just going to explore some of those reasons why. So we're going to understand movement and why it matters so much in early childhood. We're also going to look at how it helps children regulate their emotions, but also their energy levels, and how it also supports brain and motor development in our young children. But most importantly, we're going to think about how we can embed movement that is regulating in your child's everyday routines. So let's first talk about why movement matters. So movement is often thought of in terms of physical fitness, okay? But for young children, it's so much more than that. Movement is how we make sense of the world around us. Before children can even sit and learn with their minds, they need to be able to learn through their bodies and explore through their bodies. And this physical exploration that the child uses helps build strong brain and body connections. So it's an essential pathway that essentially supports their ability to attain, so pay attention, to memorize things, to build their coordination. So essentially it's building that connection between the brain and the body. A child who climbs or crawls or balances aren't just burning energy, they're wiring their brain for learning. And that's why movement is so essential for readiness to learn. Movement gets the nervous system organized and primed, and that helps for connection, exploration, and learning. So movement is there to support our nervous system so that we are able to focus. And that is why it's so important for our young kids. So as movement then builds that brain and body foundation for learning, the next step that we need to think about is regulation. So regulation is essentially how children manage their energy or their emotions and even their behaviors in response to the environment. So just like movement, regulation isn't something that kids just know how to do. It's something that it's a skill that they develop through their experiences and with support from adults. So there's a difference. We get self-regulation and we get co-regulation. So self-regulation is a child's ability to manage their emotions, their behaviors, and their energy levels independently. But this can take years to develop. And until then, children then rely heavily on us as adults or as parents to provide co-regulation. And this is us where we are able to provide that warm and supportive presence to help a child feel safe. So when children are regulated, they're better able to listen, they can learn, they can interact with others. And when they are not regulated, that's when their brains go into that survival mode, which makes learning and connection really, really difficult. So self-regulation is a child's ability to manage their own emotions. Co-regulation is when they need adult support to support them. So obviously, if you're thinking about a baby, and if a baby is upset, they're not able to regulate their emotions independently. They need a parent or another adult to help support that regulation. So regulation is foundational for everything that we expect young children to do. So whether it's learning or listening in a group time, or whether it's them playing with their peers, or whether it's them transitioning between activities, or even trying something new, if a child is really regulated, they will feel safe and they'll be able to learn. And this sense of safety allows their brain to shift into that calm alert state when learning is possible. So like I mentioned earlier, they can either go into that flight fright response where they don't feel calm and regulated, which means they're not going to be able to do any learning or pay attention or play with their peers. So we need a really calm body and calm nervous system for a child to engage with the environment. But when a child is dysregulated, their thinking and their reasoning is almost impossible. So that's obviously when their brain goes into that survival mode. So when they're in that flight fright response. So you might see big behaviors like you might see a child running or yelling, or you might even see quieter signs. Okay, so this could be things like maybe they are zoning out or they refusing to engage or participate in activities. These aren't the behaviors of a child that's trying to be naughty. Okay, these are cues that there's something going on with their nervous system, that they're possibly feeling overwhelmed and that they are struggling to engage. So if you're thinking about regulation, it lays that groundwork for the child's resilience. A child who can learn through their big emotions and with adult support are developing lifelong coping skills. So when we focus on supporting regulation, we're not just improving the here and now, we're actually investing in their future. So their future for emotional health and for learning success. So regulation plays a huge part of it. Let's think about some signs of dysregulation. So dysregulation happens, like we said, when their nervous system is overwhelmed and they cannot stay in that calm alert state. So we can often say that dysregulation can be expressed in two ways. So you can either have a child who has explosions or you can have a child that has implosions. And you can also have kids that have both. So explosions are, they're very loud and visible behaviors. This would look like a child yelling or hitting or running or even defiance. Implosions are a little bit quieter, so these are harder to actually pick up on. And this could be a child, for example, crying, sitting quietly and crying, or maybe they're hiding, or maybe they're shutting down or zoning out, or they remove themselves from a situation. And just because implosions aren't as loud and as obtrusive as explosions, it doesn't mean that the child's feeling any different. So it's still saying that the child is feeling a bit dysregulated. And obviously we'll notice those explosions more, okay? Yeah, and it's whether the child, whether a child is bouncing off the walls or curling up in a corner, both of those two children are showing us or communicating with us that they need support for regulation. Another one is obviously meltdowns or tantrums. So this is if a child is crying or screaming or hitting or even refusing to follow instructions. This is again an outward sign that the child is overloaded and can't cope. Okay, you might even see that constant movement or impulsivity. So these children may be climbing or running or fidgeting. Again, they're not just being naughty. This is them seeking input to help their bodies feel regulated. So movement is a really important part of regulation. And if you can see, when kids constantly seek movement, that's one way that they are seeking out that regulation. So all these behaviors, so whether they are having an implosion or an explosion, whether they're having a meltdown or a tantrum, whether they are showing those avoidance behaviors or those constant movement behaviors, that's all a communication. They're all trying to say, I don't feel okay right now. And when we notice these signs early, we can actually respond with movement and connection rather than following through with consequences. So we're just going to explore a little bit around sensory integration and movement. So sensory integration is how the brain receives, processes, and organizes information. And this can be information that's coming from within their bodies, but also from the environment. It's actually essentially the foundation for how we move, how we feel, and how we feel safe and respond to the world around us. If you would like some more information around sensory processing, you can watch one of my pre-recordings on the Wonders Montessori's website under events, and that will give you a bit deeper understanding around sensory processing. So we won't be going too much into it today, but we'll be discussing essentially the sensory systems that are essential for movement. So movement provides vital input into 3 of our sensory systems. The first one is our proprioceptive system. So this is our sense of body awareness. And this is understanding and knowing where our limbs are, for example, without looking, or how much force we need to apply when using utensils or when we're busy doing writing, for example. The proprioceptive system also helps us move smoothly because we are able to understand where our bodies are in space. Our proprioceptive sense helps us move through those movements quite smoothly. So we can get proprioceptive input through activities that involve pushing or pulling or lifting. And all these types of activities help our children feel more grounded. Okay, so they help our children feel calm. And we'll explore a few more of those activity ideas a little bit later on. The next system is our vestibular system. So our vestibular system is located in our inner ear, and this system is essentially to help detect movement, and it helps us with our balance and our spatial orientation. So activities like spinning or swinging or log rolling all give us vestibular input. And this system is really important for influencing things like our alertness or our attention or even our emotional regulation. And we know that some of our children crave movements, while others can be quite overwhelmed. All right, the tactile sense or the tactile system, this is our sense of touch, and it involves both deep and light touch or deep pressure. And our tactile system is there to help us feel safe and secure in our skin. So children who are over-responsive or under-responsive to touch, so this might look like kids that have difficulty with clothing. They might find clothing uncomfortable. They might have difficulty with messy play or even being near to other kids on the playground. So activities like crawling or crashing into pillows or using fidgets might help organize their tactile system. So when we support sensory integration through movement, so how we were talking about movement, so movement can help support sensory integration, and this will help children then regulate their energy levels, but also their emotions. And movement through using our sensory systems can also help improve our attention and our kids' motor skills, as well as their ability to feel confident and connected inside their bodies. So if we're looking at movement, essentially it's not just a fun activity that kids do. It's actually really therapeutic for them. So we're going to talk about all the different types of movement now. So we've covered how movement helps strengthen the brain and body connections. We've spoken about how movement helps with our sensory systems and helps our bodies feel calm and alert. And now we're going to talk about the different types of movement. So gross motor is essentially when we're using big body movements. And this involves things like running or jumping or crawling or climbing. And these big movements help children build strength and stability, but also their balance and improve their coordination. So these skills help develop from the core outwards. Okay, so a strong core or your core muscles, so your tummy muscles, and strong shoulder stability, so getting our shoulders nice and strong, are essentially the building blocks to help with those refined fine motor skills that we need for essentially like handwriting, for example. So our big gross motor activities help build our postural control, so core strength, and those are then essential to help develop and refine our fine motor skills. And without that foundational strength, children will struggle to, for example, sit up in the classroom. So we might find them being very wiggly, or even at the dinner table, they have difficulty sitting and eating dinner. They may have difficulty controlling their pencil or using scissors. And it's not uncommon to see children tiring really quickly during all these desktop activities. And I feel that it's actually on the increase. We're finding more and more and more that because our kids are quite sedentary these days, they're not developing those postural muscles and that core strength to help support them when they're needing to do desktop activities like handwriting or eating, for example. We're also finding that our kids are developing quite awkward pencil grips, and that's often related to having poor gross motor skills or not enough gross motor control. So while we might see children just playing, on monkey bars or crawling, they're developing really important gross motor skills. And this is why it is so important for our kids to move. It fuels their development for motor precision, so that fine motor precision, but also we're needing our fine motor precision for things like dressing, so doing up our buttons or doing up our shoelaces or holding utensils for eating, or even, like I said previously, like handwriting. If you're thinking about big gross motor skills as well, so also helps us develop both sides of our body. So that's called bilateral integration, which is really important for when we're having to do tasks that require two hands. So for example, cutting, holding a piece of paper and cutting, or eating with a knife and fork, or even washing our hair, for example. So all those really important daily living skills is often developed by having really good gross motor skills. And again, all these are also really important for classroom and learning. When we're thinking about brain development, so we've spoken about the brain and body connections, but movement also fuels the brain, okay? So when children are moving, whether they're climbing or jumping, they're also building, they're building their muscle, but they're also building their brains, okay? So movement activates different sensory systems and engages various areas of the brain. And this stimulation strengthens the connection between the brain cells, which are called those neural pathways. And this then forms the foundation for learning and development. So if we're thinking about, for example, crawling builds that connection between both sides of the body, which is essential for reading and writing. And while they're building the connection between the two sides of the body, they're also developing connection between the two sides of the brain as well. If we're thinking about spinning or balancing activities, this then activates the vestibular system, which is one of our sensory systems, and that then helps a child feel stable and focused. Pushing and pulling activities, so how I mentioned earlier about the proprioceptive system, this helps a child feel calm, okay? So using those heavy work activities is really important for helping children stay calm. So if we're thinking about, for example, as adults, we might want to go for a long run or go to the gym, because that's when we can exert our muscles, and that's then working on the proprioceptive system. And we all know after doing exercise, for example, even going for a massage where we're getting our muscles activated through passive input, so through somebody else doing it to us, that also helps us feel calm. But movement also helps with blood flow and oxygen to the brain. So we know that when we move and when we're using all our muscles, it's then increasing our heart rates, and then that increases oxygenation to the brain. And that again will also boost alertness and supporting those cognitive functions. So improves their attention or their memory or even flexible thinking. And we find actually that children who move regularly are able to concentrate better. So if you have, for example, a classroom, or even if you're at home and your kids are getting a bit dysregulated, offering them a movement break or suggesting them to go for a bit of a run outside or go and jump on the trampoline could actually then improve their cognitive functions as well. So like we said, movement is really, it's one of the most powerful tools that kids have to explore and learn. And so we're just going to, we'll do a bit of a recap. So obviously it supports brain development. So when children move, the brain receives important sensory information that helps them build those strong neural pathways. And again, like I mentioned, those connections helps with everything. So from memory to problem solving, and it all helps sort of develop those that learning and coordination. When we're building the body and mind connection, so movement will help children understand, for example, where their body is in space, or can help them learn how to control their movements. And when they develop that body awareness, that is then essential for them to build on balance and coordination, but even on those fine motor skills that they need for handwriting or getting dressed and buttoning their clothes, for example. It also enhances that physical health and motor skills. So how we said that it builds strength and flexibility and endurance with kids. And, you know, when they engage in activities like running or climbing, that will then help with movements that involve their fine motor development, so using their fingers. And then, like we said, emotional regulation. So movement will then support children to manage those big emotions and feelings. And for example, like if a child is feeling upset or maybe they need to be energized, movement. So let's say they're upset. So slow rocking could help them feel a little bit more regulated, or even doing a deep pressure activity. So rolling them up in a blanket and giving them a tight squeeze, that could actually help them feel more calm. If children need to be energized, for example, so if you find that your kids are a bit low and slow, we often say that they are low arousal. Getting them to, for example, have a little dance party could actually make them feel activated and alert again. Or even going and having a jump on the trampoline could help them get that energy back. So we can use all different types of movement to help a child shift those emotional states or those regulatory states. So we can help a child that is overexcited shift into more of a calm state, or if they're feeling a bit sluggish or a bit low and slow, we can actually shift that arousal level to make them feel a little bit more alert. And this is really useful when we are trying to, like before transitions, for example. So even at home, if it's time to do homework and we want to get our kids a little bit more energized or feeling a bit calm, there's certain types of activities that we can select during those important times to help them feel more calm and regulated. Even at, for example, kindy or at school, maybe before they have to sit down and do a group time activity where there's maybe more structured learning taking place, we could use certain activities to help the child calm their bodies down so they are able to transition and sit nicely on the mat. So if you're wanting calming movement or calming regulatory inputs, we often say that slow rhythmic movement is more calming and regulating for a child. So things like gentle rocking, even doing some stretches or giving them some deep pressure, those can all help kids who are feeling anxious or possibly feeling a bit overwhelmed, or even if they're feeling a bit hyperactive, can help slow them down so they can feel more grounded. If we're thinking about those calming movements as well, it can also help sort of activate that rest and digest system, okay, which helps then reduce stress in the body. So for example, rocking a child in a rocking chair or giving them a big bear hug can help them feel calm, or calm an upset child. If we're looking at alerting activities, so like we said with calming, let's say it's slow or rhythmical movement, or even a nice deep pressure hug, or wrapping them up tightly in a nice blanket, that will help with calming. And then alerting, on the other hand, is when if children feel, for example, quite sluggish or tired or even under-responsive, having quick dynamic movements will help them feel more energized. So if a child has, for example, even in a class, let's say, for example, in a classroom, we might have kids that are have been sitting down for a long time, and you can see that they're getting a bit tired and a bit chatty and a bit dysregulated or even a bit inattentive. Doing quick movements will help them become more energized. So things like jumping or spinning activities or even running will sort of wake up their central nervous systems to help increase alertness. And this essentially what it does is it activates the body's fight-flight response, but it does so in a controlled way so that they can feel more awake and ready to focus. So possibly doing like a game of jumping jacks, or if you want to do a dancing game where they have to do like a fast-paced dancing, that will obviously get their energy flowing and get them a little bit more energized. And again, we can use emotion to shift states. So the goal is then to support children in moving between states of alertness. So for example, like we mentioned before, a quiet activity like story time, you might want to do some brief bursts of jumping to energize them, but you might want to also calm them down so that you can do a quiet activity. So you might do putting them on a swing, for example, a slow rhythmical swing will help them feel a bit more calm. If you're wanting them to be a little bit more energized, so perhaps you are they've been sitting down for a long time, and it's now time to maybe get you through your evening routines in the evening. It might be a good idea for them to go have a bit of a jump on the trampoline or run around outside just to get that energy fueled up so that they have enough alertness to continue with those daily tasks. So when we're thinking about types or categories of movement, we often refer to these three main categories when we are looking to support regulation. So how we mentioned previously, we have heavy work activities. So heavy work essentially is calming, okay? And heavy work would involve things like engaging the muscles and joints that where they're able to pull and push or lift and carry or even squeeze. So those are all involving heavy work activities. And these movements will then provide that proprioceptive input that we spoke about that helps with calming and regulating, but also improves body awareness. So the sensory input then provides sensory information into the joints and muscles, which helps them feel organized in their nervous system. And if you think about heavy work activities, so there's pushing and pulling and carrying activities, those are incredibly regulating for most children. It gives them that sense of body awareness and control. And it could actually include things, if in the classroom, for example, get them to carry books or pull a wagon. Maybe they have to push the cart with water bottles. At home, it could be that they might be carrying a laundry basket or pushing the laundry basket with wet laundry into the washing line, for example. Other activities that we like to do as occupational therapists is animal walks. So we might get kids to do things like bear crawls or little kangaroo hops, and all those types of activities can be done during transition. So perhaps they have to get from the dinner table to the bathroom. You might get them to crawl like a bear all the way to the bathroom. And that heavy work is what's going to provide them with that calming and regulation. So calming activities is another one. So these involve, like we mentioned, those slow and rhythmical movements, and it often needs to be predictable. Okay, so slow rhythmicity and predictable motion is what provides that calming, helps them calm. So think like perhaps like rocking in a rocking chair. So we know if we rock in a rocking chair, that's calming. We're not going to feel alert and energized after doing those activities or after doing that motion. Even maybe like a deep pressure hug, for example. Maybe we know that getting a nice big hug helps us feel calm and regulated. Even doing things like yoga, for example, so having those sustained body positions also helps with slowing down the nervous system. And yeah, these are obviously very important during transition activities or before bedtime, or even during a quiet time activity that they're going to be doing. Maybe it's story time. So the last one is alerting activities. So these are those faster, more bouncier and more intense movements. So this involves things like jumping or running or hopping. And this provides vestibular input. So vestibular input is movement, and that wakes up the body and brain. So if a child is, for example, feeling a bit slow or feeling a bit tired, or if they're zoning out a bit, so maybe like during a morning group, if you're at school, or we know even when kids have just eaten like after lunch, they might feel a bit sluggish, and then it's time to do their homework, or maybe it's time to come in and do another learning activity. They really struggle with that. But we also want to use movement with care, okay? Because too much spinning or bouncing can also tip children into more of a dysregulated state as well. So the key is to really recognize what the child needs in that moment, but also match the type of movement to where the child is currently at. So some children may need a combination. So they might need to start with an alerting activity and then follow through with a heavy work activity. So for example, if we're transitioning kids from outdoors, from when they've been playing, so that will be alerting, and then providing them a calming activity so they can come in and sit and have dinner or follow through with their daily routines. It's not really a one size fits all, so it's really important to sort of tune into what the child needs and really look into what the child needs to support their regulation in terms of their energy levels, but also their emotional regulation. So if a child's feeling a bit upset or dysregulated or frustrated, we can actually use those calming activities to help support, to calm the nervous system and essentially to calm the child down. And yeah, it's not just, we need to think about having movement as that it's encouraged. It's really important for kids to engage in movement. So I found this really interesting statistic, and I thought it was really interesting that up to 94% of children in early childcare settings spend a large time of their day actually being quite sedentary. And this is often due to barriers within the environment. So they might have limited space for getting up and running around, or maybe there's time constraints, or even managing behaviors in the classroom, which might then prevent children or educators from integrating movement throughout their day. But we find that even if we increase movement activity or physical activity throughout the day, even if it's short bursts, it doesn't have to be long, half an hour sort of activity sessions. And even just short, small 2 or 3 minute bursts of physical activity can lead to better engagement for children. And that will then essentially improve their behavior and even enhance their learning outcomes. So sometimes we might have those barriers. Even at home, we might not have large yards, or we might not have trampolines out in the yard, but small, short bursts of energy, a little dance party or doing an animal walk down the passage, those little pieces of movement will really help support regulation. So let's think about some activity ideas that you can do at home or even at school. So we don't need any fancy equipment, okay? So we don't need, big trampolines or a whole swing set. It just needs a bit of creative thinking. So use already what you have. You don't have to buy anything new. Like, for example, a chair. You might sit on your chair and do chair push-ups, okay? You might be able to do crawling under tables, or maybe you could encourage a child to march like a dinosaur, or pretend to be a construction truck. So even tasks like delivering a stack of books, for example, or pushing the laundry basket can be regulating if it's approached carefully. Doing yoga poses is another one. Cosmic Kids Yoga on YouTube have beautiful yoga videos that kids can use to help support regulation. Even like doing movement songs or using breath regulation is another one. So blowing cotton wool balls across the table. Maybe you can play cotton wool soccer, for example, where you are blowing cotton wool balls across. And like we said, those small, simple activities can make such a big difference in a child's life. So we said short, frequent movement bursts are effective rather than one longer session. Just think of them like a brain booster. So like we might need to get up from our desks and go for a stretch or a walk if you've been sitting for too long. Kids also need those regular opportunities to reset their brains and their bodies. And these sort of mini breaks help them release energy levels, but also helps them improve with their focus and support that emotional regulation. So we mentioned how I'm using movement breaks during transitions or even during sitting tasks. So these can be, during tricky times of the day. So if you're finding that evening routines are particularly difficult, or in a childcare setting, perhaps moving from outside play to group time, that could sometimes be a tricky time. They often find it hard to switch gears. So they've had a very high energy time outdoors, and now it's time to come in and, follow through with the routine. So we might need to use those calming movements to help support their bodies to switch gears into a more calm state. So this could be, for example, marching like a soldier or tiptoeing like a mouse. So you could say to them, "We're going to be very quiet. Let's see who can tiptoe all the way to the bathroom without me hearing. So we're going to be as quiet as a mouse." If we're wanting to get more activating or alerting, we might get them to stomp and pretend that they're stomping through mud, or maybe they're pretending to fly like a bird while they're packing up their activities. Circle time is another great opportunity for kids with their movement. So many of you are already using songs or stretches here, and these are gold. So try and incorporate those sort of gentle stretches or animal poses, or even those yoga positions to help children stay focused and grounded. And then finally, just think about how movement can be part of a daily routine. So if you're an educator, you can try and integrate it into your transitions or even during your lessons. So you could even get them to jump while you're counting, for example, or get them to clap while they're doing their syllables, or even getting them to use their whole body to form letters instead of just doing it on the paper. Because when learning involves the whole body, it then sticks in the brain more deeply. And it doesn't have to take extra time. So I know we're all time poor. I know that having our families at home or having classrooms and having lots of kids that need our time, we don't often have a lot of time. But having those movement breaks will essentially enhance the time that you have, okay? Because you'll have increased engagement and you'll have reduced dysregulation, and which will then essentially reduce those unwanted behaviors, and you'll have more focused time with your kids. So you're actually not adding more time to your day. You're actually making up that time that you often where often our kids are very dysregulated. So another way we can support children is without them having to leave the classroom, for example, or even leave, for example, the dinner table. Flexible seating is really important here. So flexible seating is a wonderful way to meet a variety of sensory or regulatory needs. And it allows children to have that movement that they're needing while not having to get up and physically move around. So for children that might need to move or shift constantly in order to stay focused, that's where things like wobble cushions would come into play. So wobble cushions are round air-filled cushions that once you put a little plug in it, it provides that movement. So kids can actually be moving while they're still sitting. You also get things like balance stools. So these are also called wobble stools. So they're essentially the base of the chair is on a rounded, is a bit rounded underneath, so it allows that movement while they're sitting on the stool. Another one is having standing desks. So standing desks can make a big difference, especially in classrooms or even during dinner table or dinner time, or if you're in a kindy or Montessori environment, perhaps having tables without chairs while they're doing Play-Doh. So getting kids to stand and knead the Play-Doh would also be helpful, so that they're still moving. They're not having to sit and be sedentary in their chairs, but they can still engage in those learning activities. And all these options provide that gentle movement while they're sitting, and will also help children who seek movement. Okay, so we know a lot of our kids seek a lot of movement, and it impacts their learning. So if they can stand and do Play-Doh instead of sit, then you might find that they'll be able to engage for a lot longer. Floor cushions and bean bags can also help children who need to feel more grounded. So while rocking chairs or those sort of stools can allow controlled movement, children that struggle with postural control will often then benefit from having those floor cushions or bean bags. We can also make setups in the classroom that are sort of fidget friendly. So for example, putting resistance bands on the chairs or of the legs. So if you're not sure, so those resistance bands you can buy at, for example, Kmart. They are user resistance bands for gym, for when you go to gym, for example, and you can wrap those between the two front legs of the chair, and children then can still move and kick their legs against the resistance band, or they can even bounce their feet on top of it. So kids can still be moving while they're required to be sitting. But the key here is to provide autonomy and choice. So if children can choose how and where they sit, they often actually feel more empowered and they're more likely to stay regulated. Not every child needs a special seat, but every child will benefit from a classroom that provides those opportunities. So if they do need to move, for example, they have access to those. So even, for example, at home, you could have these various wobble seat or flexible seating options if they're needing to engage in, like we said, like feeding, for example. So things that we might need to look out for. We often only really notice a child when they are clearly dysregulated. So this is when they are crying or already melting down or refusing to engage. But before we step in with support, it's important to look at those dysregulatory signs and understand how we can best support them. When a child is already dysregulated, so when they're already in that crying and melting down phase, the child's nervous system is already feeling quite overwhelmed. So the key is actually to start learning and noticing those early cues that the child's feeling a bit dysregulated. So we might start noticing kids sort of shifting in their seats, or then we might see them slumping over or having difficulty sort of sitting upright. You might notice them gazing off to the side. Maybe they start fidgeting more than usual. So I know if we often see our kids when they are feeling a bit dysregulated, they might start fidgeting with the peer sitting next to them or with their sibling, which then often causes them to become more dysregulated. So when we start seeing these early signs, we can then respond proactively. So rather than sort of trying to be reactive in the moment, when they're really dysregulated, we can really start being proactive and seeing those early signs. So this might mean that we might even offer them a wall push-up, for example. So offering them to get up from their chairs, put their hands against the wall and do some wall push-ups. Or maybe you might prompt them to help you move a heavy item. So maybe you're wanting them to lift the couch so you can have see what's underneath the couch, or maybe you can get them to lift chairs and put them on the table. You might get them to carry something heavy to another room, maybe like a laundry basket, or you can even help them or invite them to help with a movement job like tidying up toys, for example. And all these micro interventions or these small little movement breaks is what's then going to reset the child's nervous system so they can stay engaged. It also helps build those observational skills or observational lens into your regular routine. So while sitting on the mat or during a transition time or at the table, you'll actually start noticing kids' patterns. So you'll know when they might be feeling or showing you those signs of dysregulation. And it's really important to try and get in those movement activities before things start escalating. So just start keeping an eye on those sort of early cues of, restlessness or slumping or fidgeting or even them avoiding. And that might be your cue then to engage them in a movement activity, which will either be those alerting activities, or it can be calming activities, or it could be a nice heavy work activity to help support regulation. I often use this saying in my presentations, and it's kids will do well if they can. So if children aren't doing well, it's important that we are able to intervene and provide them with that support that they need. If you are concerned about a child's movement, so if they have too much movement or too little movement, and that can impact their engagement or even their ability to learn, it might be a reason for a referral to an occupational therapist. So there's various things that we might be looking out for. So we might look out to see if there's sensory processing difficulties that are impacting their movement. So this might mean maybe their vestibular system isn't working appropriately, so they might be seeking out movement and not registering movement appropriately, or perhaps it is body awareness. So maybe they have poor postural control and they can't sit up straight, so they're constantly moving because they're having difficulty sitting upright. So if you're feeling that there is movement that is sort of concerning and you're not quite sure what's going on, just reach out to an occupational therapist, and they might be able to help and provide support for that young child and their family. Awesome. Well, That is it. I know that was a lot of information. We covered quite a lot about movement, and who knew that movement could be so complex? It's not just about physical or physicality. It's actually about building the brain and supporting the nervous system through having regulated nervous system, so they can learn and they can play. Yeah, so it's quite a big area, and it's so important. And like I said, I feel that a lot of our children are becoming more sedentary. And that's obviously just the lifestyle, that we have these days. But it's important to be mindful of this and try and see how we can ensure that our kids are still engaging in those movement activities. So, yeah, does anybody have any questions? It says, my child can't stay still at the dining table, constantly moving. And I gather from today's talk that it's not that abnormal. Yeah, and it depends on the age of the child as well. Moving at, when our kids are younger, they will seek out more movement. But if it is starting to impact the child's diet, he's 3. So yeah, he's young. So our kids do struggle to sit and stay still for a long time when they are young. And that's also because they are also developing their postural muscles, okay? And I think when we're looking at sitting at a dining room table, for example, for meal times, it's not just about that. We need to look at them holistically. So looking at them in all different environments. And if it's starting to impact their learning or impact their ability to complete meal times, then we might need to look into it a little bit more. Okay, so he's 3. Kids are still moving quite a lot at the age of 3. They're still up and down from the dinner table and they can't sit through for a full meal time. But if it's starting to impact them eating or engaging in other activities, then you might want to sort of consider exploring that a little bit further. Okay. And thinking about Valentine, also thinking about your question as well, there's different reasons why kids move as well. So like you mentioned, it could be sensory processing, or it could be because they have poor postural skills, they're constantly wiggling and having difficulty to stay upright. Or it could also just be developmental. So there's different reasons they might be seeking in movement. And yeah, it might be worth trying out one of those calming activities before mealtime to see if that will help them perhaps stay seated at the dinner table. All right, Anna says, wondering about recommendations for movement in the morning before daycare to improve mood and attitude of our little one. About getting in the car and going. So some days he struggles or he doesn't want to leave home. And sometimes, and it might be like a movement difficulty, but maybe there could be other things going on for him. So perhaps he's feeling a bit anxious about getting into the car and going. Oftentimes I feel like doing some heavy work activities prior to leaving the house, especially before a transition, is helpful. So it could be like having a quick pillow fight, for example. But even like we had spoken about doing a movement activity during a transition. So while he's on his way to the car, maybe you could get him to balance his teddy on his back or a comfort item, and getting him to do an animal walk to the car. So perhaps incorporating a calming movement activity while having a transitional object could also help with the transition. So sometimes kids have difficulty with those transitions when they're having to change an activity to do the next one. So for example, like you say, completing the morning routine and then moving to go to the car. And could also mean that he's possibly feeling a bit anxious about going to daycare. So there could be a few little strategies you can put into place. Yeah, even like carrying a heavy backpack can sometimes help. So you know how we spoke about heavy work activities can also be quite calming. So maybe you could have a little weighted teddy or something in his backpack and getting him to carry that. But yeah, there could be other strategies like having a visual schedule, for example, so he knows what's happening next, or a little timer that can show him and prepare him when the activity is going to be changing, when it's time to leave for school. But yeah, incorporating some of those heavy work activities during that transition could help him with regulation, so he could feel a little bit more calm by the time he gets to the car. Karen says, I noticed it becoming more common in the classroom, and it has really made us reflect on how to do everything from group times to free play to meals. It's become very prevalent in the last 5 years, increasing each year. I totally agree with you, Karen, and it's so important because I think we're often afraid to use movement. I think we're afraid to use it because we worry that it's going to dysregulate our children. But movement is so essential for child development, and we can see, even things like increasing oxygen to the brain, and using movement in a therapeutic way that can help support calming or regulation, or even activating and alerting our kids to stay focused. So just cueing into those sort of early warning signs when kids are starting to feel a bit dysregulated, or there's, you can see there's a bit of a shift in their behavior, and think about which activities can be used during that time. So yeah, thinking about calming activities versus alerting activities, or maybe doing a heavy work activity to help them feel a bit more grounded. Okay. Thanks, Anna. Thanks for that. Thanks, everybody. I really hope that was helpful. But from Little Wonders Montessori and Upside Down Therapy, we thank you for being here this evening, and feel free to get in touch at any time with either of us, and would be happy to support you.